Ever since Donald Trump became president in January 2025, we have been waking up to a new executive order almost every day. In just his first month back in office, President Trump has signed nearly 70 executive orders, reshaping policies on immigration, healthcare, civil rights, and more. Some see this, some people, myself not included, but some people see this as strong leadership, while others call this government overreach. But here's really where the big question is how much power does a president really have through executive orders? And what happens when lawyers like myself push back by going to court? And today I want to talk about a perfect example of this, and that being DACA. Now, you might be surprised because we're going to have this conversation about DACA, and it's actually what the Fifth Circuit has said is an illegal executive order that Barack Obama created when he was president. So I share this because it's important for me as a source of information for you. If you're coming to me and you're trying to learn from me, it's important that you know, number one, that I am a biased person. I have biases toward favorable laws for immigrants. I can't tell you how many times people have called me an illegal lover and things like that on social media, as if they think that's going to be an insult to me, and it's actually the greatest compliment because I'm not hiding who I am. Everybody knows who I am. But it's also important for me to know, for you to know, that although I have biases when it comes to how the law is enacted and how, as a country, our whole system is created under the Constitution, how I agree. I think we should all agree that the way that laws are created and the way that they're carried out is very important for our whole system to work. And when we have overreach from any president, good old President Obama or good old President Trump, anytime we have overreach, it's really important that the three-part system works to hold any branch of government in check. And so we're going to use DACA as an example because I have been kind of sounding the alarm bells for a while. You can go back through the podcast and hear this, where I'm really worried that DACA is going to be on the chopping block next. And really the writing's on the wall because this is something that's in Project 2025, is to essentially get rid of DACA. And the foundation has been laid because of a Fifth Circuit decision saying that DACA basically is not a lawful program. It's not a lawful use of an executive action. And, we don't know what's going to happen next, but I think the writing's on the wall. So in this podcast, we're really going to talk about how much power does a president really have through executive orders and what happens as the court pushes back. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a side-by-side for you of, when we think about what are the president's objectives, how do we know what these objectives are so that we can see why these executive orders are coming down the pipe. Project 2025 is really clearly the playbook that President Trump is using, and he's using executive orders to carry out this playbook. And so I'm going to take you through a little bit of a side-by-side so that we can understand where things are, where things may be going, and kind of brace ourselves for that while seeing how does the court work. So let's start with DACA. And that's going to be kind of my thread through this podcast, is helping you understand executive orders, because I'll give you the bottom line up front. President Trump wants you to think that he is a king and that he can basically tell you what laws are, what they mean, and that through executive actions and executive orders, he can just make new law. It was quite disturbing this week when President Trump, when the White House social media posted a picture of Trump basically saying, in a crown, basically saying like long live the king or whatever it was. That's really, really disturbing. Trump wants you to think that he has the power of a king, but I assure you that he does not. And I want to talk to you a little bit about any executive action and how those executive orders work. So let's start with DACA. DACA was created by President Obama through an executive order, and it changed the lives of literally hundreds of thousands of young migrants, young immigrants, until, that is, it was legally challenged and ruled unconstitutional. And that's a Fifth Circuit decision that happened in 2024. So now in 2025, we're at another turning point Will Trump issue an order to end DACA once and for all? We know that, in Trump's first presidency, he ended DACA for new applicants and eliminating DACA for existing people. The existing people are kind of in this great phase of limbo. And if you want to know more about who are the people, who are the faces of DACA, go back to my last podcast. Go to the 100th episode and listen to Itzel Bailon's story. Itzel is a poster child for why we should have a program like DACA and, frankly, why we should just create green cards. Frankly, if we want to call it amnesty, whatever you want to call it, I believe that we should create green cards, a green card process for people like Itzel. And that it's actually a stupid decision for us not to do that from a fiscal perspective, because these are amazing people, no criminal history, have graduated from our schools. We've already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars of putting them through our schools, and now they're able to enter our workforce and are working. That's why they have their work permit. And it would be a real stupid move to shoot ourselves in the foot as a country. But I digress. Go listen to Itzel's podcast and get to know the story behind a DACA recipient, so you can kind of understand this more, because not everybody who looks like me is going to know someone who has DACA, or you're not going to realize that that person has DACA. So this is a great way to pull up a chair kind of in the living room with me and Itzel and have a great conversation, and you can kind of be part of that and really get to know Itzel, and now you will have a new way of thinking about DACA. So we are still wondering, will Trump issue an order to end DACA once and for all? And with his executive orders aligning with Project 2025, what does that mean for immigration policy moving forward? So today I want to cover 4 things: what executive orders can and cannot do, how DACA started and why courts have ruled against it. Third, I want to talk to you about how Trump's executive orders compare to Project 2025 proposals. And fourth, what this means for dreamers and the future of immigration policy. Immigration orders are shaping your life right now. So let's talk about how they really work. All right, let's jump into it. What is an executive order? An executive order is a written directive issued by the president to federal agencies telling them how to enforce existing laws. I want you to really be thinking about existing laws. Think of it as a presidential memo. It doesn't create a new law, but it does instruct how the executive branch applies them. Presidents have used executive orders to expand rights. Think of this like when we desegregated the military through an executive order, or even protecting young immigrants like Barack Obama did, President Obama did, through DACA. We've also seen presidents restrict policies through executive orders, like banning Muslims from traveling or cutting other regulations. We've also seen presidents use executive orders to manage government operations, like declaring national emergencies. But here's the catch, and it's a really important one. Executive orders must be based on laws already passed by Congress or already in the Constitution. Executive orders cannot create new laws or amend existing laws. So that's why when we saw the most recent, one of the birthright citizenship executive order saying that birthright citizenship to people who, if you're undocumented or you were illegally in the country and you had a kid, those kids are not U.S. citizens. Those kids of illegal immigrants do not get to have birthright citizenship. That was one of the executive orders that Trump issued, and the first judge to work on that case after it was challenged in court said, this is the most obviously unconstitutional executive order. Like, what are we even doing here? And the reason for this is because an executive order can't amend the Constitution. It can't add things to the Constitution. And by saying, everybody gets birthright citizenship except for these people, that's an amendment to the Constitution that you cannot do through an executive order. All right, DACA. Let's talk about DACA. How this executive order, this executive action has changed immigration policy. So let me take you way back to 2012. It's actually the year I graduated law school. So I was kind of like becoming aware of so many different things. And I was painfully unaware of how important DACA would be until I really got into immigration law through my career. But in 2012, President Obama issued deferred action for childhood arrivals as an executive action, not even as a formal executive order. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind is you can have an executive action, but Trump likes executive orders because he likes to pick up the little book that he's signing the executive order on, and it's got his signature on it. And like, he likes the social media and the fame aspect of it. He likes having his signature on all these things. It's very much king-like behavior. It's giving king, because even when he issued the COVID checks, he wanted his signature on those, even though the taxpayer money was actually who was funding all of this. It's not like Donald Trump funded those things, but he likes to have his signature on things. And so that's why he does a lot of things through executive orders. By contrast, this was an executive action from President Obama. Let's reflect on the three main things that DACA did. First, it allowed undocumented immigrants who had come to the U.S. as children to apply for protection from deportation. Second, it granted work permits to those who were granted DACA, and it also allowed them to get a Social Security number. Finally, it provided temporary status, renewable every few years, while they have this protection from deportation. So it's basically saying that we recognize that you're not supposed to be here, that we have authority to deport you. However, we're not going to act on that authority at this time. We're going to defer taking the authority of actually deporting you for this temporary time while you remain in this status. Now, why was DACA controversial? Why is it still controversial? The critics have argued that only Congress has the power to decide who gets immigration protections. President Obama issued DACA specifically after Congress had failed to pass the DREAM Act, meaning that he acted without legislative approval, and that's why this is controversial. What's important here, though, is that President Obama didn't create a new status, as in, this isn't a new pathway to a green card. It's simply saying that we're not going to deport these specific people, and while they're here, we're going to give them some leeway as we make this decision. It's really interesting because ICE already has the authority to decide not to deport people. A lot of folks are issued an order of supervision, and that's for 1 year or 2 years at a time, and they're allowed to get a work permit during that time. And so on some level, this is in the same, it's like a cousin of an order of supervision, which ICE has the authority to grant. So although it's controversial, it already exists as a mechanism in our immigration laws and has for decades. So in 2017, after President Obama was out of office, 2017, President Trump entered the scene and he tried to end DACA via executive order. But the Supreme Court ruled that his administration hadn't followed the proper procedures in rescinding it. Now, in his most recent campaign, on the campaign trail leading up to his election in November 2024, he promised and said, hey, these DACA kids are good people. We're going to do everything we can to protect them. But we have to remember, we cannot have a short memory when it comes to what one person says and what they have actually already tried to do. And in 2017, Trump already tried to end DACA. And I mean, I think that we are just one pen stroke away from going about this all over again. So that was in 2017. In 2021, a Texas judge ruled that DACA is unconstitutional, stating that a president cannot unilaterally grant immigration protections. In 2023, the Fifth Circuit, one step up in the appeals court level of that Texas federal judge, they upheld this ruling, that the Fifth Circuit upheld this ruling, saying that only Congress can create programs like DACA. So where are we at now? Current recipients with DACA can renew, but no applications are being accepted. And I believe that the Supreme Court may ultimately strike down DACA completely. So what happens next? I mean, I think we know what happens next, and that is Congress needs to do something. But will it? And will Trump try to end DACA entirely through a new executive order? I'm going to now take you through what are the existing executive orders in comparison to what Project 2025 has suggested. I know on the campaign trail, Trump said that he had no idea what Project 2025 was, and then, that was a bunch of hooey, essentially. But unfortunately, that's pretty clearly not true. And the reason for this is Tom Homan worked for the Heritage Foundation. Tom Homan has now been, appointed or named or given the job of, air quote, border czar. And Tom Homan helped write a lot of the immigration policy initiatives in Project 2025. And then an additional person, Voigt, I don't know exactly how to say his last name, sorry, but he's just been confirmed as the new person in charge of the budget, and he was one of the main authors as well of Project 2025. So I'm also going to show you policy, executive order versus what Project 2025 has suggested, and you're going to see the writing on the wall. These are not coincidences. This is Project 2025 is coming to life in 2025, and we're just along for the ride. So we can open the playbook and see what the future holds, essentially. So let's talk about DACA and Dreamers. Project 2025 calls for ending DACA and any similar protection unless specifically passed by Congress. At this point, no executive order by President Trump has been issued. However, Trump is expected to attempt a full repeal of DACA. And so I think that these things are very much in alignment. And it's just a matter of time, whether forcing, if Trump does go through the proper procedures through executive order and repeal DACA, will this force Congress to act and pass some sort of protection? Or are we going to see a lot of DACA, what were DACA recipients, being picked up by ICE and deported? Because there are thousands of young people who have DACA, but they also have final orders of removal. Thousands and thousands of people who have final orders of removal from immigration judges. But because they have DACA, they have protection from removal. And so those would be, I think, very fast people for ICE to go pick up and immediately deport because they already have final orders of removal. And I personally am seeing this sort of thing in my own law firm where my clients who have final orders, even if they have other pending cases, if they don't have DACA or some other stay of removal, they're getting picked up and deported. I haven't had any clients, I have had one client illegally deported, and they're bringing him back. But none of my clients so far have been deported, but that's what they're doing. That is for sure the playbook of ICE right now. So I am seriously worried about this. I don't know how else to say it, but I'm going to ask you over and over to go listen to Itzel's story and think about Itzel and think about her 3 little kids and then think about how the thousands of other people who have DACA are just like Itzel. And we need to call Congress and tell them to get their shit together right now and do something right now. We don't need to wait for DACA to be repealed. We know that this is a problem. We know that the writing is on the wall. Let's do something now before we're in triage mode and we've deported all these people. And now they no longer have access to a green card because now they've been deported. Okay, coming off of my soapbox here, let's talk about border security. In Project 2025, it calls for mass deportations, stricter border security. It calls for the elimination of asylum. What are we seeing with Trump's executive orders? Increased detention centers, people being flown to Panama, to Costa Rica, and to Guantanamo for essentially deportation. We have expanded local police authority on immigration under Trump's policies from executive orders. So we see a very strong alignment. This is not a coincidence. Project 2025 is Trump's playbook. Kamala Harris said it, and we did not listen to her, and we instead believed someone who is a pathological liar. Okay, like I said, I am a biased source of news. Take it as you will. Sanctuary cities. In Project 2025, it advocates for financial penalties of any sanctuary area. Let's see how this played out in executive orders. President Trump already issued an executive order blocking funding to cities that refuse to cooperate with ICE. Totally strong alignment. There is no complete alignment here as well. They have not strayed from Project 2025 so far. Refugee policies. Project 2025 calls for reducing refugee intake permanently. And what do we have? Starting day one from executive orders, President Trump canceled a flight that was supposed to be on its way for people who were already approved through the whole process from Afghanistan to be able to come here on a plane and be able to be a refugee because, you know, we used to be in war in Afghanistan and like shit's really, really bad there. And instead of following through with that process, these folks are still stuck there. And the people who are at the border, I mean, it is anguishing to watch the people who've been waiting for years. There was one woman I watched on, I think it was NBC that was reporting it, weeping because she'd been waiting for 18 months at the Mexican-American border, waiting for CBP-1, which was the app that CBP had set up to give you your place in the line for eventually being able to come to the border, seek asylum, and ask for permission to enter, or to be, you know, told, no, you can't come in. Waiting just for that opportunity for 18 months, living in a tent city. Project 2025 called for reducing the number of refugees intake permanently, and Trump's executive orders have already done exactly that. In fact, it appears that he's even using a little-known immigration statute called INA Section 212F to deport people, to essentially expel them from the country for as long as he sees fit. This is complete alignment on what did Project 2025 suggest and what is Trump doing through executive orders and other behaviors. Complete alignment. Last but not least, Project 2025 suggested advocating for cutting all public benefits for non-citizens. Trump issued an executive order restricting access to federal benefits for undocumented immigrants. Like the same thing. Project 2025 is Trump's plan, and it's coming into fruition. States are also criminalizing people if they use fake documents or lie when they're trying to get things like WIC or food stamps here in the United States. So it's not just executive orders, it's also states, including my great state right here in Arizona, that's really trying to, put people in jail for trying to get benefits. And we have to keep in mind that undocumented immigrants pay taxes. And so they're paying into a system that if they use any of the money that they've paid into the tax system, they will be put in jail. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. I understand I understand the underlying policy objective. I understand why this is the way that it is. If there was some great fear that undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants, were truly like a leech on our social services. But when we see the millions, if not billions of dollars that undocumented immigrants pay into the tax system, like that's the truth. That's when it doesn't make any sense. That's when this is all just a bunch of smoke and mirrors to try to demonize undocumented immigrants. Okay, let's look at our key takeaways here. I've got 3 for you. Trump's executive orders so far are so closely aligned with Project 2025 that I'm not going to guess what he's going to do next. I can go look in the book and figure out what's next. What's next? And one of those things is takeaway number 2. DACA's future is in serious jeopardy, especially when Trump issues an executive order that completely rescinds it. And so if you have DACA, you need to contact an immigration lawyer and figure out what are my other options? What is my plan B? Because right now DACA is my plan A. I need to figure out what my plan B is so I can have a plan B. Third is Russell Vogt. I hope that's how you say his last name. I'm just a girl from Kansas. I don't know a lot of fancy words, and I think that's how you say his last name. But anyway, this Russell gentleman, he was the architect of Project 2025, and he is now the White House budget director, making all these fiscal policies, including immigration funding, very likely to reflect, making it very likely to reflect Project 2025's vision. We have serious problems. Okay. Here's why executive orders aren't enough and why Congress needs to act. DACA is a prime example of why executive orders and executive action are temporary. And I think that on one hand, we should be happy that some of these executive orders that Trump is issuing are just never going to go anywhere. But it's also frightening when we see that some of these executive actions from prior presidents who were helpful, they were helpful and very much left alone for a long time, when those get rescinded, what happens when Congress fails to act? A lot of bad things can happen. The only permanent way to protect dreamers, and that's what we call the young people who have DACA right now. Some of them are, 30 years old. I used to think that I was close to that, but I'm about to turn 40. 30 years old. We need to help protect them. So what could happen next? Trump could issue an executive order. If Congress does nothing, DACA will disappear, leaving thousands and thousands of immigrants without protection from removal. Congress must pass permanent immigration reform. That's what's got to happen. So as we close it out here, my friends, I want you to see that, most importantly, DACA shows us that there are powers and limits of executive orders. And presidents can act, but real lasting change requires Congress to create statutes. So what can you do from here? I want you to rest easy, a little bit easier, knowing that these executive orders, Trump is not king. President Obama was not king. We haven't had a king in this country since we started it. And so executive orders have checks and balances. Sometimes that's challenging because if Congress doesn't act, a lot of people are put in a vulnerable situation. So call your representative. Pick up the phone. Don't wait for something bad to happen. The writing is on the wall. Please, I beg of you, listen to Itsel's podcast and then call your congressperson, your senators, and demand a permanent solution for our dreamers. Second is just stay informed. If you're a DACA recipient, keep track of your renewal deadlines. Make sure if you're out having some drinks with friends, don't get a DUI. DUIs are the fastest way to lose DACA. And then there's really no stopping your removal at that point. You will lose DACA, and ICE will then be able to use you as one of their 75 per day quotas that they have to hit of picking people up and detaining them and eventually deporting them. And last but not least is please seek legal guidance. My team is here to help you. There are so many great immigration lawyers out there, people who I love and I would trust with my own family. There are so many great people out there. Talk to someone, because at this moment, hoping that Trump is going to fulfill the promise that he's going to help you isn't going to be enough. This is not going to pan out. Look at Project 2025. My friends, as we close out, know that laws should not change with every new president. It's time for Congress to act. And please, please share this podcast with someone who needs to have some peace of mind about what executive orders are and how they are not the new law from a king. Thanks, my friends.